I'm going to be taking the first segment. So we're going to talk about the Supreme Court taking up Christian postal workers' religious claim. This is an article published on January the 13th on NBCnews.com by Lawrence Hurley. This article tells us that Gerald Groff, an evangelical Christian, has brought an employment discrimination claim against the U.S. Postal Service, which could force employers to do more to accommodate the religious practices of their workers. In this case, judges will hear an appeal by Jeff, who believes that the Postal Service could have allowed him Sundays off to allow for his religious practice. I've got mixed feelings on this one, so I'm going to pass it on over to our panel to hear what they think. And I'm going to start with my very, very good friend, student Dr. Ben.
Oh, I'm going first. All right. So I don't have a lot of issues with this because normally I do stand on the side of employees because I do think reasonable accommodations are important. It's important to respect the lives of your employees, and they're not, selling their entire lives to the business. It's a job. So it's important that you do allow for people to have things that are important in their lives. But I have some questions about the context of this, specifically what happened, because while I absolutely think that employers should be making accommodations for certain religions, I think that they need to do this for all religions. And oftentimes you get people who will say, well, I wasn't being accommodated for. And then there's kind of this social expectation to where if, let's say I work for an organization and I need whatever holiday off, let's say I want to celebrate Christmas, and somebody else is a Jew that does not want to celebrate Christmas. Maybe we do a swap and I say, I'll take over for your shift on your holiday that you need off, and then you take over for me when I want off. And like that's kind of a fair negotiation to where at least everything's getting covered and everybody has some accommodation. So if this person was willing to, compromise in other areas, then that'd be probably a good way to go. But I just don't know what the discussion was behind the scenes. Did this person say, I want extra time off and I'm not willing to put back in anything to the rest of the organization? And there's just a lot of questions I don't know. So generally, I'm going to say I'm in favor of the accommodations, but I can't say for sure what the whole situation was.
Yeah, Phoebe.
I cannot but roll my eyes when I see another one of these nonsensical cases taken up by the Blue Laws Supreme Court. I mean, yes, okay, it's the US Postal Service. Yes, it's the government. Yes, the government cannot discriminate. It's differentiated from private companies, but it's a Sunday. Whoop-de-doo. It's another day of the week. Nothing special, nothing amazing, nothing to write home about. It's a Sunday. I guarantee you, if this was a Muslim making this claim and they said, I want a Friday off, the Supreme Court would have laughed at them. Or if it was a Jew and they said, I wanted a Saturday off, they would have laughed at them and said, nah, get out of town. We've seen this before with the Supreme Court when they said, in certain cases, you can only have Christian religious practitioners if you're being executed to be in the room as your spiritual advisor. Why? Oh, I know why. It's 5 Christian fundamentalist lunatics who have decided that they're going to start imposing their own religion on the rest of America. I cannot but roll my eyes at this nonsensical absurdity that is just flowing from Washington, D.C., and 5 complete morons, 2 of whom were appointed by the Bush family, and 3 of whom were appointed by the 45th president of the United States, running amok, creating blue laws up the wazoo. I mean, where's this going to stop? I mean, I remember a while ago, there was a court case in Florida where a woman sued a private company and about working on Sundays, and they awarded millions and millions and millions of dollars, all out of all proportion, because it was a Sunday. Yes, okay, you can have deeply held religious beliefs, but the employment you choose, in my opinion, is optional. You have the freedom in America, in Europe, in Western economies to decide, I'm going to work somewhere else. She could very easily have done that. Yes, okay, you're not going to find another postal service that's going to be delivering like the US Postal Service, but other employment exists. You don't need the US Supreme Court coming in and micromanaging companies to say you will do Christianity or you will do nothing else. I mean...
I'm glad we've started with a Phoebe rant.
That was nice.
BB, what are your thoughts?
I agree with both of you guys, actually. Basically, I feel like what we're seeing is the continued push from the Supreme Court to shove Christian Sharia law into the government. Like, they've made it abundantly clear that they have no intention of upholding the Constitution and even the concept of separation of church and state be damned completely. Like, they don't care. Like, I've only been on this show a few times, but if my memory serves correctly, every time I've been on, we've discussed some fuckery from the SCOTUS. Like, every single time I've been on here. In this story, it shows something else that's terrifying, and that's like the religious zealots outside of the government, the everyday blue collar fanatic, like, you know, those guys. They recognize that the highest court in the land is fighting for their side. And that's why we see such an uptick in cases being brought forward. They understand that this is their time. And I just like to remind all Americans that are going to be affected by the Bible becoming the law of the land, when you vote for a politician, remember that they help decide who your justices are. I know, like a lot of us a few years ago, we saw Clinton versus Trump, and we're so tired of voting for the lesser of two evils. But you have to remember in those situations that the lesser evil is less evil. Those decisions, no matter how depressing they are, they help us to avoid situations like the one we're in. Just try to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I used to be one of those people who used to think I was really anarchic and didn't want to vote at all for anybody. And I think for myself now, I think it's definitely something that you need to do. You need to get there, and regardless of who you choose to vote for, get out there and vote and have your voice heard. I think for me, this case is something struck me about this as soon as I read it. And Gross' case is focused on accommodating religious practices, but his complaint is that his religious belief is that Sunday is a day of worship and rest. And what I want to know is, which is it? Because this nuance is very, very important. Is it practice or belief? This is what I would be asking in this case. And I think it's a very, very important distinction to make. If it's a practice, then the practice of Sunday worship can be carried out outside of work hours. If it is about belief, then it's a much more interesting case. Are the employees expected to accommodate every minutiae of belief or risk discrimination cases? Is the person on the supermarket checkout then not obligated to sell somebody meat because they are a vegan? And that might seem like an extreme example, but this is the distinction between personal practice and perfect personal belief. And I think it's a very, very important distinction to make. Ben?
Yeah, all of these are really good points. And because I guess when we're thinking about this too, I think there are a lot of religious exceptions that are made to this kind of ruling. Like, I know while the Mormon church is particularly adamant about taking Sundays off, they often require it for their churchgoers to do that. But you see in healthcare fields and others, they've made exceptions for, well, you're doing something good, and you need to be doing that job to help your community. So oftentimes they will let Mormon doctors practice on a Sunday. And I think this might be a similar case. You know, I mean, the Postal Service doesn't seem to be, when you think about it, it doesn't seem to be the most glorious world-saving job. But you go back to the lockdowns and how miserable it was without the ability to send each other things, without the ability to order what you needed to from the internet, or even people are getting prescriptions mailed to them because they couldn't go pick them up. So it's an essential service. So to say that your church would not make any accommodations for an essential service, I don't know how true that would be. And they might not be accommodating in the church, but it's interesting that we're talking about like the job needs to be accommodating, but churches don't need to be accommodating at all. So
Yeah, Phoebe.
So I need to ask my Scottish friend here. Are you a rugby fan?
No, I'm not.
Oh, that's a shame. Because if you were a rugby fan, you would know that throughout the years, a number of Scottish rugby players have given up international rugby careers because of their deeply held Christian beliefs and playing rugby matches on a Sunday. They won't do it. So they won't play international rugby at the highest level. Just won't do it. And that's their choice. And if that's your choice, and you choose to forego that, and that's the choice that you make, fine. But we're now straying into the worlds of, well, where do we draw the lines here? Because there are some elements of Christianity, particularly from what I was reading, the Christianity that's being pushed here, that are quite bizarre, shall we say. What next? I'm allowed to stone somebody to death for working on the Sabbath? Am I allowed to do that now? Is the Supreme Court going to let me, pick up some stones and start hurling it at people walking into the local branch of the US Post Office? Because look, you're working on a Sunday. The Bible says that you can't work on a Sunday. I mean, for crying out loud, this is the logical extent of it. Because if you start saying, well, okay, the Bible says you can't work on a Sunday, but the Bible also says you can be stoned to death for working on the Sabbath. So, who's with me on picking up some stones and going and stoning our local branch of the post office? Come on!
Before anybody jumps in and or who's watching it or listening and says that's a slippery slope argument, let's remember that people have bombed abortion clinics because of their religious belief. So that's not as an extreme case as it may sound to begin with. I think one of the things for me, I don't understand about this case is that the employer did accommodate his request. If you read the article, which is below, if you want to go and read it, pause the show and go and read it and come back if you want to, his request between 2015 and July 2018. Unfortunately, we are not party to the circumstances that changed in that period, making it difficult for me, at least, to fairly assess this case. Something clearly went on in that period which changed the circumstances. And I think that needs to be kind of addressed and pointed out. So it's not just the case that this guy asked for, can I not work on Sundays? And they said no, and it was being discriminated against. They actually allowed him to do that for quite a while, a number of years. And then at some point, something changed in which he wasn't allowed to do that anymore. Phoebe.
I just want to try to avoid something that I've noticed that I do. Like if it's a Christian complaining about something that they're not allowed to do, my reaction is usually shut up. So I'm going to try to empathize a little bit, but I mean, let's look at this from other perspectives. Can a Catholic person working in a CVS say, I'm not selling condoms? I'm just not going to do it. Can a Muslim person working in a supermarket say, no, I'm not selling pork? I refuse. It's just not going to happen. What are the consequences for them when they do that? Like, they're going to get fired. So basically, you refuse to do your job, you don't have that job anymore. That's usually how these things work. So even if I am being accommodating, that's pretty much how these things work.
Yeah. Phoebe?
The distinction that I have to draw here is that the United States Post Office is the government, and private companies such as pharmacies, butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, they're all private companies. So they have a different standard as far as I'm concerned. And the government can't discriminate against you because you have no choice when you're to interact with the government. Private companies, you have more of a choice. But that said, you can't be unreasonable in bending over backwards for accommodations for individuals. And I hear what BB says. Where would the Supreme Court draw the line? Is the Supreme Court going to wall itself off and go, yes, we've got our nice Christians here who can do everything, and because the majority of Americans are Christians, that makes America Christian? just having more people does not mean that the mob get to overrun and overrule everything else, even if it's a minority of that mob, so surrounding the whole mob. Where does this end? Because are we going to be ending up in the dystopian universe that is Gilead of the Handmaid's Tale, with the Bible being read out and, oh yes, that's what was sworn on the Bible, therefore it is true, therefore this, that, and the other? This is not an abstract, illogical conclusion jump here. Yes, these things are extreme works of fiction, but you have to look at where the points of origin are. Is the point of origin the text of the Bible being used here to push the legislation and the legal framework in a certain way to the exclusion of what the actual text of the Constitution says? And I think there is a serious danger that cases like this can sail the America's Cup all over the loopholes they're creating in the Constitution of the United States. And it's a really damaging and dangerous thing that everyone needs to be, really careful of and really mindful that it's happening.
Yeah, I think in closing, for me, this is not an open and shut case. I think it's reasonable, if possible, it's not always possible, for businesses to accommodate religious practice. And a Christian can certainly practice their religion while working a Sunday shift. I think religious belief, however, is a different ballpark altogether, and this would require a much deeper analysis of the individual belief and the specifics of what is being asked for. And this is the crux of the story for me, because Groff appears to be bringing this case because he feels that both his religious practice and belief has been impacted. And it just seems untenable for a business to guard against, and, making any reasonable adjustment. I just don't think it's possible for any business to be able to do that. And I think we need much more detail in this case. If I was sitting on this case, is that the right term, legal terminology? I don't know.
You sit before a hearing of a case.
Yeah, what Phoebe said. I'd certainly be asking. I'd be wanting that distinction between practice and belief, because I think it's very, very important. Everybody else has made fantastic points, and I can't say I disagree with anyone. I like a bit of oomph in the articles where we all disagree with each other, but we've not had it yet. So let's go on.